Alrighty, welcome everyone to another episode of the Students Against Mandates podcast. Today we're pleased to welcome Ken Ruettgers and John Stockton from Voices for Medical Freedom. John is an alumnus from Gonzaga University, and Ken is an alumnus of the University of Southern California. After college, John played in the NBA and is regarded as one of, if not the greatest NBA point guard of all time, playing on the Dream Team alongside some of the best basketball players to grace God's green earth. John is undoubtedly a legend, not only within the NBA, but across all sports. After college, Ken had an incredible career playing in the NFL, playing in over 150 games as a dominant left tackle for the Green Bay Packers, winning the Super Bowl with the very same team that drafted him and inducted him into their Hall of Fame. After the NFL, Ken received his MBA and his PhD in sociology and began his teaching career. Both Ken and John are family men and well-respected alumni of their respective universities. I speak for everyone involved with Students Against Mandates when I say that it is a real pleasure and a huge honor to have you guys join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. Well, we also quickly have to say, I know you guys usually do it on your podcast, but a big shout out to John's sister Stacy for setting this up. It was a couple of years, and I'm sure the groups heard me going, geez, I think we can get John and Ken. This might work out. You know, we just got to get those few more interviews, and then to be greeted at the end of it all by a big warm welcome from Stacy, and she put tons of work into getting all the schedules arranged there. So it was a lot of work behind the scenes on her part there. And so we're real thankful there. But just quickly, just before we dive into the question, I know Camille let me chat for a quick sec here. Just wanted to say, you know, the impact that you guys have had on students here. Oftentimes it was adults saying, you know, where are all the students? And it took a little bit for the students to get encouraged, get motivated. It was real pressure on Canadian students up here north of the border. And I had a friend, many people we were in communication with who were really struggling with their respective universities. And one had reached out to me and met him through a Zoom class. He plays for my university's basketball team. And he had been, you know, getting pressured to get the vaccine, didn't want to. And he reached out to me one day with just a little link, and it had a description. And he just said, "We're not alone, actually." And it was a video of you guys there, and that was the first time I connected. It was Voices for Medical Freedom, and I thought, what a great thing. And it was real pleasure. And not just that you guys are athletes, and of course I grew up with you know, you guys being very prominent figures. My grandparents went to Gonzaga there, and my grandfather, all his siblings went to Gonzaga, and a lot of people in my community, because Gonzaga's got a great teaching program. For those who are not aware, I went to Gonzaga, so we're always watching the games. And I was laughing with one of my friends. He said, "Do you recall that out of our basketball team in high school, 4 out of our 10 plays were called the Stockton 1, 2, 3, 4?" And we kept saying, you know, we're not John, and we're getting killed out there. We got to change this up. We think we're going to need a new playbook there. But my coach used to carry around a Jerry Sloan book, so we were kind of our fate was sealed. But anyways, regardless, it's such a treat there, you guys, and it's just great guys, and it's been really fun to listen to you chat, and so it's a real pleasure there. But so let's jump right into the questions there. So you guys have, can you just explain how your views got you connected for those who don't know, and what efforts you've taken to kind of, you know, from your place in your respective sports, be a guidance figure for athletes who are forced to get the injections or lose their careers. It's been tough for college athletes, all right up to pros there, and even for young athletes just wanting to get involved in their sport. You know, I know you guys were working with Mike Fisher there a little bit, a great Canadian figure, and he was saying he was working with some hockey players to get them connected, see how they could manage the mandates. But were you guys working with some football players and some basketball players there too? And so, yeah, two-parter there, how you got connected and some of the efforts around helping athletes.
Ken, you want to start, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, the getting connected part, it's getting a little foggy for me. You know, Ken feels like a lifelong friend to me now. We've probably known each other for what, 3 years, 3.5 years now. And I don't remember how the initial introduction came, but we do have connections that were behind the scenes. He played football for years with my brother-in-law. And so, and he had a real connection. He passed away, unfortunately, and Ken took up a program to do special stuff for NFL athletes trying to transition from their playing days to afterwards, because that's a difficult transition for guys. And so we didn't know about these connections going in, but it sure has solidified the friendship and got us started really pretty early on. But I think what you find is, like, both of us are well, we care about our kids, we care about our grandkids, like not unlike everybody around the planet. But we saw something definitely wrong with being forced to take a shot of any kind. I mean, we're not experiments, and our kids aren't for experimentation. And the rules and the laws that were bypassed to try to mandate. I mean, it's just one thing after another, and it gets to the point where you look at yourself as an individual and say, I can't ignore this. If I have a voice, if there's two people out there that would benefit from speaking and saying something, I think, and I think Ken agrees, you're pretty much forced to say it. And that's certainly what we both saw. And, you know, I've been very fortunate with that relationship. It's growing every day. And, you know, good to have a friend like Ken.
Well, yeah, I know for both of us, you know, we have family members that had, as a result of some mismanagement, or not getting the care that they need. Your grandfather, right, John?
My dad.
Your dad,
Yeah.
yeah. I keep thinking your grandpa, your dad. So your dad had some challenges, and you pretty much saved his life by advocating for him. You want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll pick up from there.
Yeah. The older people are, gosh, you're just barraged with advertisements. If you're older, you're vulnerable. If you're young, you're vulnerable, and you need these shots, you need those shots. And again, my experience in being able to read through that nonsense happened 30 some years ago. So I was a little bit prepared for COVID when it hit in terms of the onslaught of the medical pressure. But my father took a flu shot because we felt that was, I didn't, but as a family, we felt that it was the best thing for him, keep him from getting sick, etc. So he did it 3 years in a row, and 3 years in a row he goes into sepsis, which is a very, very serious blood infection, and it can kill you. So he spent a month in the hospital, several months trying to recover to his original baseline, which he never did. Each time that baseline got lower and lower and lower. So yeah, after the third one, I mean, we're slow winners around here, but after the third one, you go, wait a minute, that's right after the shot, 3 years in a row, we almost lose him. And so that turned everybody's head. They started to say, look, there's something wrong with that. And we know that there's formaldehyde in it, there's aluminum in it, there's mercury in those shots. And so, again, back to once you know these things, you have to speak. Kids is more serious, frankly. I mean, way more.
Yeah, we our youngest had some vaccine issues, and the doctors did an amazing job of doing basically what we might call an IVIG kind of treatment today, way back in '92. And we kind of got through that, and everybody got through it unscathed. And you know, life happens and other things happen, and you get distracted, and you know, maybe looking back, you go, man, glad we dodged that bullet, and you move on. I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think a lot of us, a lot of the public, you know, is like, I'm glad I dodged that bullet. I didn't get locked down. I didn't lose my job. I didn't get injured by the vaccine. And because of the relief, I think there's a big part of the people out there that aren't standing up, like John said, and speaking truth and speaking out in their circle of influence, and living, you know, living on life, living forward in life, trying to forget that. But my wife took she was in social work, and so she was in the first rollout, early in the first rollout, and immediately within 48 hours had swollen lymph nodes, neurological reactions, tingling and pain coming up from the back of her, you know, into her face, almost like she, you know, was coming out of a Novocaine, you know, where it gets tingly when you go to the dentist and you're coming out of a, and just got worse and worse and worse, and ended up in ER a couple times, and doctors didn't know. It was, you know, early on. And to answer your question, Sheldon, on the well, let me back up a little bit on that. And so anyway, she formed a group with a few doctors, and a lady named Brianne Dressen, who, Sheldon, as we mentioned earlier, just hit the news a couple days ago, suing AstraZeneca, first American citizen to be able to take a COVID court case because she was in the trials. Anyway, they wrote letters because they were doctors thinking, hey, we're doctors, you know, we can sign a letter to the White House and the CDC and the FDA and put our names on it and throw it out there, and you know, and get a response. And obviously they must not know, otherwise they wouldn't continue these shots. And so they did not get a response. Eventually I reached out to to Ron Johnson, who was the guy that originally connected John and I, was Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. And he held a press conference for my wife and Brianne Dressen and Maddie DeGarry, who's the little 12-year-old girl a lot of people know, who was in a wheelchair, and a couple other ladies. And we thought for sure, these ladies told their stories. And the weirdest thing about it is there were probably 4 or 5 camera crews there with the news people doing them, and a couple newspaper reporters, and the camera people that were operating the camera. You could see, listening to these ladies' stories, they were tearing up because it was just so tragic. And but you could see the news people, they were looking at their watches going, come on, hurry up. So I got to get my clip and then get home for dinner. And it was really weird. And we thought as soon as people knew the story, then everybody go, oh, okay, no. And the reality now that we had found out since is they knew these adverse events were happening, and they kept it. They kept it from people that were getting injected. So there was a violation of full consent, and and just a flat out injustice, on the level of humanity. And people should be, something should be happening. People should be going to jail for some of the things that were happening. As far as your question on athletes, yeah, it was hard. I got a call from a mom of a first-round draft pick, and that was going right when John and I started Voices for Medical Freedom, and the NFL was putting in lockdowns, and I got a call from a couple of college kids as well. And it was tough because there weren't any really good options, and Aaron Rodgers, I thought, did a great job of he he could have been maybe a little more honest, but it's crazy in that you can't blame the guy for saying, hey, I'm using the word immunized to say I'm taking care of myself. I've got my protocols and my plans. I'm seeing doctors, getting information. And so I think he was on a prophylactic a regiment, to try to stave it off. But even the vaccines were not, meeting the promise of if you take this shot, and forgive me for using the word vaccine, because we had to change the whole definition of the word vaccine, just so that we could give an experimental gene therapy shot into as many arms and make as many dollars for the new billionaires in this world as we could. So, but just talking through with these athletes, helping them know they're not alone, but that yes, it's a tough decision. And I had one college student that was a football player, and he had an eligible redshirt year. And I said, look, you could take a redshirt year, and you might benefit from that, because it was really weird. He could practice with the team, but he couldn't go on games. So he would be redshirted that year. So it's like, okay, you can be in the locker room, you can be at the training table for meals, you can practice, you can shower, but you can't play in games. So as you guys mentioned, there was just so much inconsistency and double standards and just things that didn't make sense. So,
that red shirt example, at least the double standard, it makes me think of I'd written a legal memorandum about this case called it was named Lewis versus Alberta Health Services, and a big problem with transplant, like organ transplant patients during COVID, was that unvaccinated people could give their organs. However, they couldn't receive organs should they need a transplant. So, yeah, I mean, the double standard, it was living and breathing during the pandemic. People villainizing the unvaccinated for making just a personal decision that ended up being the right one, as opposed to trying to level the playing field or make people realize that we aren't criminals, we aren't bad people, we're just doing what's best for us and ours, right? But just to move on, I wanted to, that at least with the vaccine rollout, and you were mentioning the idea that we were never promised an end all be all with the vaccines as a an end to to getting the virus. But I remember early on we heard Fauci saying, I don't know if this is verbatim, but the vaccine is a dead end for the virus. And then a couple months later, oh, and it wasn't a dead end, it's just to help with deaths. And then, oh, it's not to help with deaths, it's actually with transmission. And we now know none of these facts were in fact real or fact based. But and with the messaging too, I remember we had a conversation with Dr. Scott Atlas, and he had mentioned that a lot of the messaging involved or surrounding COVID was not based on any science whatsoever. The scientific method, you can call it, was thrown out of the window and replaced with this quasi ideological stance on promoting this vaccine, whether it be for the billionaires or the companies or the government, who knows? But I mean that part blows my mind. But I just wanted to ask you guys, and we'll start with Ken. What were your thoughts on the COVID-19 injections at the beginning, and at what point did you realize that a lot of the messaging and effectiveness of these alleged vaccines was in fact a sham, for a lack of better words? I mean, I know personally, when I was always skeptical, I wasn't gonna get it, but my breaking point was when they were saying kids need to get the vaccine. That's when I said, okay, enough's enough. I mean, this is outrageous. But and we'll start with Ken. So at what point did you realize that this was a problem?
Well, it was mixed for me, and it stayed mixed for a long time because there were things that made sense, and there were things that just absolutely were crazy to digest and think that can't be true. And so, the best lies are lies mixed with truth. And I think that's what we got, was a lot of lies, but we also got a little bit of truth. And I think that's what was confusing. When I saw early on that the UK came out with a model that was saying like 3.5% of the world's going to die, I'm like, first of all, I said, that's not that's that's a lot of people, but as a percentage, that not only seems high, but even if it were that, it's not like it's 25 to 40%, not like like the Black Plague or
Right.
And I thought, man, are we, I don't mean to minimize any of the people that have passed because of COVID, but I thought, man, it seems like we were way overreacting to this. But okay, so we go on. I think the lockdowns and the masking, was like, it doesn't make sense to me. And then when Cheryl, when my wife, there was a lot of pressure put on her to keep her job and to keep her, and she was working her hours. So that would have been a total reset. She was almost done with her internship hours and she'd had to start all over. And so she did a lot of research. You couldn't find anything out there early in that period, even though the drug companies knew. I mean, a lot of the people that had been injured by the first jab of the set of 2 series, they were just taken out of the trial and given a classification and given a general classification. So nobody knew, hey, we're dropping you because you got injured from the vaccine. It's like, that'd be like transparency and honesty and right. But we were lied to from the get-go. And so, as things moved on, and then people started getting injured, and I'm like, wait a second, this is, and so we started speaking out, and I remember even of the group of, gosh, within a couple months, there must have been hundreds, and then a few months later, thousands of people that were on these Facebook groups. Facebook groups started getting canceled. But yeah, and so then at that point, it's like, how deep does this thing go?
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, well put. That's for sure. So John, let's do the same question for you there, and then we'll jump into university mandates. What were your initial thoughts there? I know you had actually had a trainer years ago. It sounded like, or a chiropractic, kind of gave you some different insight when you were with the Jazz there. But was there certain messaging? Was there certain perhaps data you saw early on that made the hairs on your neck stand up a little bit and gave you that extra caution around this? And love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's kind of a lifetime of knowledge about by that time for me. I mean, and by a lifetime, I mean, I started my career as very much medical, everything, whatever. My mom was a nurse, my sister was a nurse. And so this chiropractor, Craig Bueller, was the team chiropractor. And I didn't even use him for a couple of years. I thought that that form of healing was a joke. And I wanted no part of it. And I suffered some consequences for it. But ultimately, he fixed things. I had a problem with my lower leg once. It was a tendonitis that I had for almost 2 years. Everybody told me it would heal in the summer when I took some time off. But in the meantime, I took anti-inflammatories constantly for a year and a half. And finally, my trainer at Gonzaga, my good buddy Steve, said, "Hey, look, you can't take these all the time. That's not good for you. It's going to have other repercussions." So that's just a little entree to all this. Eventually the guy heals that in 5 minutes. He fixes that in the office and it never came back. Just a little, touchy feely stuff that I can't explain in this amount of time. And he did it over and over again on multiple things, sprained ankles, colds, he just fixed stuff. And so he earned my trust. And over time, he said, "Listen, you and your kids, you should probably not vaccinate your kids," and tried to explain it to me, but I wasn't having it. So we vaccinated our children pretty much according to schedule. And then one of them got injured, not like the type of injury Ken's talking about, but coming out of the hospital, he's sick every day of his life. Eventually had to have his tonsils out when he's almost in college, and and then we discovered when he was 4, he got the next round of shots. He did display instantly. So we said, well, there's something here to this. And that caused me to dig. And from that point forward, I read things, I talked to people, I listened. I had my own personal experiences I mentioned with myself. I took the flu shot because I didn't want to get sick during the season. And I got sick during the season and spent 2 days in a hospital in Charlotte. And so my eyes have been open to say, listen, it may not have caused that me being sick, but it sure didn't prevent it either. So maybe there's something to what this guy is saying. And again, since then, by the time COVID rolled around, I had seen the repetitive messaging on TV. In the United States, we have, gosh, you can watch a program and 8 out of 10 ads on the TV is all pharmaceutical. So they tell you how it's going to save your life, and then it says may cause swelling of the lips, sterility, and death, and it's all the disclaimers, and you go, why? And so personal experiences, reading, my own data, I came up, and then the COVID repetitive messaging is an indicator. When you hear everybody going, you must do safe and effective, safe and effective. It's a time to turn and watch because you're in the mob. And my dad always warned me to stay away from the mob.
Yeah, pretty wise advice. Yeah, it was for me and Camille at the university. We read on this stuff. I mean, both having backgrounds in history and philosophy. The messaging is eerily reminiscent of some pretty scary times in history. And so, for us as students, we were kind of going, geez, talking to each other, going, this is pretty concerning here. And then the language was quite dystopian to say the least at times. But we're going to jump into the discussion around universities here. So before we get into thoughts on the mandates of universities, let's just first off have you guys tell us, what were your university experiences like? I mean, what did you study? And what did the university mean to you, and how did the university shape your life and really your interests? And we can start with Ken there if you like.
Yeah, well, I think for me, and I see this I teach college, community college freshmen and sophomores, teach sociology right now. So um, sometimes I get a little frustrated, that they're not moving forward fast enough with their critical thinking, and that there's a lot of indoctrination that they get, especially in high school. But then I think back to I have to remember, okay, where were you, Ruettgers? What was it like for you when you were 18 or 19? I'm like, oh, well, yeah, they're doing a lot better than I was. I mean, I almost flunked out. There's a lot of distractions. I think that transition, from high school, being home, a lot of support. Now you're out on your own, and a student athlete, juggling the demands of classes, the academic side as well as the athletic side. And I think the other thing too is, you come out as a pretty well established athlete at the high school level, and somewhere it took a couple years for it to translate that you're no longer in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. This is big time college football. This is, there's big guys, and so it took a few years before I figured out that you know, if I stay on the road I'm on, I don't like where it's going to end up. I don't want to, in 3 years, I don't want to be in this place. I want to be up here. And I said, well, who are the guys that are on this road? That's the road I need to be on because they're going to end up, or they're ending up here and they're a couple years ahead of me, and that's where I want to go. So I knew I had to, I didn't know the verbiage for it, but if I could tell myself today what I was doing back then is I had to change my playground, I had to change my play friends, and I had to change my play toys, and I did that. So, but it was a big transition, and you know, athletics, I think, can take a little bit of, you know, can take so much time that you don't get that full college experience, which, you know, I don't know. It's, you know, today I look at students that are, you know, paying a lot of money, a lot more than John and I did when we were in school. Tuition is just crazy. And then people get, you know, tricked into these, not tricked, but, you know, they get, um, encouraged into going into massive debt with student loans. And I think to myself, wow, man, if you're going to college for that college experience of that 100K sorority or fraternity party, that's a pretty expensive beer, you
Yeah.
know? And so, you know, maybe there's some other ways in today's modern, you know, in today's world with tuition the way it is to get there, you know, in a smarter way to get to the end.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And for yourself there,
Well, for
John?
me, I'm gonna have to make a confession right here. Is when I had a chance to go to college, you say university, the school wasn't the biggest part for me. I got to play basketball. To be perfectly honest, I that was really where my focus was. If you said, look, you can only do one and the other one doesn't matter, that was an easy choice for me. So that's my confession. Having said that is, you know, my parents made it very clear they wanted us to graduate from college. I always wanted to do well at things I did. I think that's an important maybe part of character for people is how do they perform in things that don't matter as much. And I wanted to show well. I wanted to represent my family well, my parents well, and so I didn't want to come home with you know, 3 Ds and a C. Well, you passed, John. Great job. I want to do as well as I could at that, even though it wasn't prioritized. So I really enjoyed my college experience. I met my wife there. Had great fun. By some of my best friends, most of my best friends were in that 4 year period. And the breadth of information, not information as much as experiences and knowledge that you gain there, I think is hugely valuable, probably more so than the degree. It almost guarantees that when you're done, you can speak to people on a variety of conversations, even ones you're not knowledgeable on, because you can engage in a conversation and you can listen and you can also speak and express yourself. So I think university is an outstanding thing. I think it's a little in question right now. As Ken said, it's so expensive. They seem to have as a whole a mission in mind, and boy, I don't know if it's as clearly beneficial as it was when we were going through it. And I think there's a lot more room for trades and people that if I had my kids going through it now, would I send them to school to be a plumber? I mean, because the average age of a plumber here in Spokane, Washington, is 63 years old. And so you go, wow, we need plumbers. You know, we need people that can get work done. And so I don't know. We all have to find our niche. University was great for me, mostly because it brought basketball but a lot more.
It's great. Yeah, and just to touch on the university experience, I think personally, as someone that was I was in my freshman year when COVID started, so they sent us home in March, kept us off campus for a year and a half, and then coming back into my junior year, they had vaccine. At least I think most, if not every school in Canada had vaccine mandates in place. So personally, I mean, I was kicked out of school for, you know, choosing to exercise my personal and medical autonomy. But and I know, and you know, it's interesting. I made a lot of good friends that were in the same predicament as me during that year off. So I mean, I learned a lot about myself. I wouldn't be where I am today had I not, you know, taken a stand in that respect. And my parents are proud, although at the time they didn't necessarily agree. They look back now and they're proud that I, stood by my morals. But during that year off, not my year kicked out of school, but the year where we were locked down, nobody was allowed to be on campus. I feel as though we were robbed of that critical experience, and like you said, it goes way past the degree itself. It's the ability to learn how to work with others, how to meet new people, talk to new people, engage in conversations. And I think that year of isolation and in your own house with your screens, looking at Instagram or whatever, playing video games. I mean, it melted the brains of a lot of university age students and high school as well. I mean, the 2002 kids, so the year younger than me, they missed prom, or their high school prom, their entire first freshman year of college, university. I mean, in some respects, I mean, you have to look at it from the pros and cons perspective, and see how badly they mismanaged this entire situation. So that leads me into my question. Could you see? I mean, you can put yourself in our shoes, I guess, if you'd like, but could you see early on how vaccine and mask mandates and I think more importantly, isolation could seriously deter the benefits of college or university? And we can start with Ken on this one.
Well, I was a college professor. I'm still teaching part-time, but I was a full-time college professor. And yeah, we went, all screens. And I got to hand it, on a side note, I got to hand it to you guys. I mean, Canada, as bad as it was here, man, you guys in Canada, whew, it is, I mean, it was, Trudeau became like, authoritarian, tyrannical, shutting people's accounts down. I loved the truckers, the truckers strike. That thing was like spoke to the whole world. It's amazing when people stand up, and it always is the hardest to be the first one. But after you're the first one to stand up, Ash's group conformity study, it's always hard for the first, but once the first person stands up and you get other people joining you. So keep using your voice. I so appreciate all your listeners that are using their voices out there, and you guys as well. But yeah, we at our school, yeah. So I think they did pretty good considering, but it's not like being in person. And I do think that coming out on this side, more students now are doing the online. We have more students doing online learning, and I just don't. It's harder as a professor and as a student. Here's the round. You can't do as many group interactions. Now you can do breakouts on Zoom, in a Zoom classroom, but there's just there, and we do breakouts in person. You can't do that to the same degree. There's just a lot of nonverbal communication that happens, and so being separated is not, it's not fully being in part of a group and being on campus. And I think that isolation, I think we still have we have a lot more to figure out at the price we're going to pay for what we did, especially to grade school kids, but college students as well.
I agree. I mean, it's we did an interview with somebody, maybe Ken, you can help me, but we're herd animals. We're meant to be together. We're meant to be exchanging information, ideas, having facial contact. Our facial expressions are way more a part of communication than the words we use, and that's blocked. Literally rules of our government, the right to gather, the right to go to church, those are obliterated right from the get-go. And why that wasn't just a warning to everybody saying, wait a minute, we can't go to church. I don't care if you're religious or not, but we can't. Who are you to say I can't go to church? Who are you to say we can't gather? Who are you? I mean, and so you take us social beings and you put masks on kids, and in addition, you spray their desks with all these horrible disinfectants, which impact you and they impact your health. Breathing your own exhaust. I mean, go ahead and plumb your exhaust pipe from your car into your car and see how that works. And it's not meant to be. It's such a this whole thing's such a crime against humanity. And then you look at a Pfizer report, for example, and you say, okay, these are well-meaning people. And listen, I mentioned my mom and my sister are nurses, and I know the care that goes these nurses, what they do with their lives. We interviewed some nurses, the care they put into other people. Most doctors, I mean, they're devoting their whole life to our health and well-being. So a lot of them bamboozled. They're bamboozled by their lifelong of education. They're bamboozled by being told that this is the only way to go. But Pfizer knew. Now this is in their own tests before COVID was ever rolled out. In a 3-month period, they had 1,100 deaths and 42,000 adverse reactions, and they went ahead with this.
Yeah.
And so, how can any doctor or any so even if these doctors and nurses are just these somebody is very evil moving up this line, and they allowed this to happen. They knew it happened. They changed rules of informed consent. I mean, even some nurses, I mean, you could get the shot at a local grocery store. You could get shots on campus, which surprised me about Gonzaga. You could get shots on campus. What do you mean you can get shots on campus? You just roll up the sleeve and you do this. Where's the informed consent? The informed consent on the actual one of the doctors, not Leslie, Dr. Moon, Renata Moon, displayed in front of Congress. She took out the insert from the box of the COVID shots that's supposed to have every bit of information about all the tests, whether it's safe, whether it's effective, blank, flips it over, blank, completely blank. They knew. And that's probably the hardest part for me to stomach in all of this is a lot of people need to pay a price for this. I'm not chasing them. It's my thoughts are about trying to convince people not to fall prey to this anymore. But boy, there's some evil things going on way up the chain.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you say you're not chasing, I promise you, as a young future attorney, it is on my bucket list to do what I can in the future, whether it be in the US where I would like to practice or back home in Canada to make sure there's answers to the questions that we have. I mean, to touch on the trials, it was nearly impossible. And let's be honest, we don't have a fraction of the information on the trial or the trial data itself. But we're being kept in the dark here on a lot of these issues, and it allowed them to commit to what I would classify as first degree murder. I mean, premeditated, intentional, deliberate. It wasn't like they knew what they were doing, and the fact that people are just covering their eyes now, pretending nothing happened is, I mean, it's a problem. And the more awareness we raise, the more important this issue is going to be on the minds of the average Joe and the person who, whether they got vaccinated or not, if they just don't care because it's in the past now. I mean, if you're naive enough to think that this is just in the past, you need to take a history lesson because this kind of stuff happens all the time. As soon as the government gets a little bit of power, they don't give it back. I mean, I'm not American just yet, but I know as far as I'm concerned, this country fought a revolution in order to gain their personal autonomy, their freedoms. To hand that over so easily, I think would be a big mistake and something that people are gonna have to fight for in the future to gain back. But
well, I might add to that too, if I meant, Camille,
yeah,
we also fought
absolutely.
a civil war for freedoms. Millions of people died, and they tortured our children. The masks, the isolation, whether you're a little kid who had no risk whatsoever at all of any injury. I mean, literally statistical zero. They're forcing these kids to take shots and wear masks, or they can't attend school. I mean, that's a type of torture that will you can't even measure. So yeah, there's some things that are pretty awful out there, and I'm glad to have young people like you willing to carry the yoke moving into this, because this can't go away. It can't go away invisibly. It just can't happen.
I couldn't agree more. And I'll tell you a little story about masking, but I did want to ask you a little a question first. So I recall hearing you say that your kids were going through university at the time, and we've heard the story regarding your season tickets. If you don't mind, could you tell us a bit about how the pandemic, I mean, if it's not too personal, how the pandemic response affected your family and perhaps also your relationship with Gonzaga? I mean, we heard the season ticket story, so if you don't mind telling us a bit about that as well, that'd
No,
be
no.
great.
First of all, I love Gonzaga. I still do. I mean, I grew up on campus. I literally snuck into the gyms as little kids. They used me to pull the chains open on doors that they would drop me as little, and they dropped me down between the gap, and I'd scurry around and open a window and let guys in to play. They never let me play. I had to dribble on the side. But I mean, from the time young as I can remember, I was sneaking onto Gonzaga's campus and part of it. So I love Gonzaga. I love what it stood for in the past. I love the athletic program, still do. We play with the guys still, friends with the coaches. So that's not where the issue is. It's kind of like I don't have an issue with the nurse that goes to work every day and is, overwhelmed with all their duties. They're doing what they're told. So, but I'm at the games, and I feel a little bad about this, but you had to find a way. You had to show either a COVID test that you passed a COVID test, or you had to show your vaccine card. I refused to do the vaccine card, so I had to figure out a way to show that I tested negative for the shots. That was bad enough. You walk through it. Gosh, I remember walking up to the stadium, a place I used to just love. You're all smiles walking in. You got your family in tow, and I'm walking in, and you feel like you're going to a concentration camp, and there's just that tension, and am I going to get through this line? And am I going to be able to escape through the gate? All that just a horrible, heavy feeling. Then you sit down, and everybody's wearing masks, and everybody's saying, "Hey, put your mask on, put your mask on." And I might do this for a second and then pull it down. And then finally I said, I'm not doing this either. And I left it down and said, go ahead and just stop me. So, I'm not the only guy in the stadium, clearly, but I'm looking across at the students, and they're all masked. They're all going through mandates. They're being forced to take shots to attend this great university that I'm pretty proud of. This is so wrong. I'm not wearing a mask anymore. I get told to, and finally the administration called and said, it wasn't the administration, but came through the athletic director, who's a friend of mine. He said, John, I'm getting pressure. You got to start wearing a mask. And I said, well, what if I don't? I can't. I can't, because I can't show those guys across the way that this is okay.
Yeah.
And he says, well, if you don't, I'm going to have to take your tickets. Not one. I mean, we're friends. It's not what I want to do. So it's coming from up above.
Yeah.
And, I said, well, I'm not wearing a mask. He said, well, then your tickets are revoked. I said, well, it's the way it goes. And so that led to an article in the paper, which gave me a chance to explain it, and they gave them a chance to explain it. But it was, my family's all disappointed. It wasn't just my ticket; it's all my family's tickets. And there was something we did every game. We couldn't wait to go, and it's not part of our lives right now. So it's a small price to pay, frankly, Cam. It's Ken's wife has issues still to this day for having taken the shot. There's people that are suffering. That mine isn't suffering. It's a sacrifice. I'd like to have the tickets and be able to do what I do, but it's a very small price to pay for this issue.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The way we were telling Ken earlier, but the way I got introduced to Students Against Mandates and got involved with the group was through my protesting so when I was kicked out my junior year, I was a year ahead because I'd taken summer classes. So it was a bit of a knock on me to not be able to finish early as I'd planned to. But when I went for my senior year, the year after, when they lifted the vaccine mandates, they still had mask mandates in place. So I go to class for the first couple weeks, and I wouldn't wear a mask anywhere where it wasn't required. It was required everywhere in Canada, but if I was on public property, you're not going to make me wear a mask. Grocery store, you're not going to make me wear a mask. On school, it was a bit different because we would get kicked out of school if we didn't wear the mask. So a couple weeks, I'd show up to class, my first couple classes, wouldn't wear the mask, tell my teachers like this, I'm not okay with this. You can't ask me for my medical exemption legally. Let's not make a thing of this. I'm not going to wear the mask. A couple of them were cool with it. But I had one professor that said, no, mask, or I'm calling security. They're going to escort you off campus. So, I had first couple classes, I would wear the mask, down like here, do what I could, trying to brainstorm a bit on how I was going to do this, because it was driving me crazy. It wasn't so much of that. We had evidence and data. The CDC itself says that masks, the blue masks that we were forced to wear, doesn't stop transmission of viruses. So that was one thing, but also that just the idea of covering my face when I'm in public is not something. If you want to do it, go for it, but that's not something I'm okay with, or something I want to do. So after a couple of weeks, I was talking to some buddies and trying to figure out how I could get around it, and I decided, okay, I'll wear the mask, I'll comply. So I looked up the rules in the university handbook, whatever. And I saw, okay, it doesn't say necessarily medical mask. It says medical mask or a face covering that covers your nose, mouth, and chin. So I started brainstorming. I'd find ideas, and I decided, okay, I'm going to wear the mask. I'm going to cover my face, but I'm not going to wear your mask. I would show up to class with different apparatus, you could say. One day I wore a bell pepper, another day a bucket on my head. I bought like a Soviet era gas mask on eBay and wore that one day, a Spider-Man costume, like whatever I could think of to get around the mask. And it started gaining traction. And after a couple months of doing this, the school had to take down the mandate, because every time I would tweet a picture of my mask of the day for this class, it would get hundreds of thousands of interactions on Twitter. And the schools, there's a lot of pressure on the school. I mean, we had people like Jordan Peterson reposting and putting a lot of pressure on the universities that still had mask mandates. And a couple of my fellow students followed suit. And as Ken was saying, the hardest part is being the first one. And I didn't think about it like that. I didn't want the notoriety or anything behind it. I wanted these mandates to be dropped. And it wasn't as hard. And I've said this in previous podcasts for students that are listening. I mean, being the first to do something, although it may seem difficult, with hindsight, it's not at all. And it really wasn't it wasn't something I had to think about in the moment. It was a natural reaction to my desire to see the right thing play out, and having kids forced to. I mean, we're 18 to 22-year-olds. We're not at risk here. To be forced to cover my face in the name of science when the science doesn't even show that is mind blowing to me. And for whoever's listening, I mean, being the first to do something may seem difficult, but it really isn't once you actually start it. And people will follow suit when they realize, okay, if this guy could do it, why can't I? So we had mass refusal to put masks within a couple of weeks, and then the school had to realize, okay, if people aren't going to do it, then we have to drop the mandate. And so I empathize with your mask story for that reason. I mean, for me, is the vaccine. I mean, that was never something I was going to do, but the masks, I never thought I would actually be forced to do it until I was.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting aspect, and one of the many, but I remember very much so. A friend came into my class and said, "You got to look at this guy. This is just too bizarre." So we knew we had to interview Camille, and we ended up getting him on, which was a lot of fun. But Camille, I recall too, it was a lot of carrot and the stick, and both our universities had a lot of incentives to get vaccinated. Like you guys had mentioned before, it was really odd stuff. I mean, you'd walk into a class and had nothing to do with science, medical history, or anything, and rather they're making a pitch to get vaccinated and promoting incentives. And so, Ken, I'm really curious. You're teaching at the time, like in your own institution there. What did you see amongst the faculty? Was there a push to have this, and was there incentive based stuff? I mean, what were your concerns? This is a fascinating aspect of your story in particular.
Yeah, I'm still trying to find out if there was an incentive, but it was pretty crazy. So early on, so 29 at the end of 2019, China's got this stuff going on, and by early 2020 or mid, spring, we're starting to lock down, lower, flatten the curve and all that kind of stuff. And then it's like, hey, we're going to get this vaccine, and Operation Warp Speed, and so our school starts. They form a committee to make a recommendation on excuse me, on procedures that to the president. And so they come out with yes, we're recommending mandates for work, and they were willing to be very liberal with exemptions. And in Oregon, you can do a philosophical, medical, or religious exemption. So they were willing to be fairly liberal with that, which, I had a problem with, because there were a lot of, the problem is that they were letting people have this doorway instead of dealing with no mandates regardless. Let's move the exemptions out of the way. Mandating, any kind of thing you're going to put in your body without having full consent, without having bodily autonomy, you're violating people's rights. And so to excuse that and allow that and justify mandates by saying we're going to give you an escape hatch, well, then you can just, once you have that in place, then just remove the escape hatch, and then that becomes okay. So I was pushing back on that, but as we all remember, there was so much fear And of course, that was being social, that was a psyops type of a social psychology that was being pushed for an outcome.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh yeah, well, we're probably going to go, we're probably going to get mandated in the fall, like the NFL and a lot of universities like you guys were. And on a side note, I think there are at least 25 or more colleges and universities currently in the US that are still requiring mandates to attend school.
Yep.
So, and I was pushing back on the committee. I was pushing back on the president, and they decided to let it go. And by that point, I was department chair. And so, I was like, hey, we need to revisit this, because things were at that point were changing so fast. New information was coming out. A lot of studies were coming out of Europe, Germany, Japan, some in the UK about the injuries and the transmissions. And so our president held off, but eventually implemented way late, like 2022. And I'm thinking, with less than 8 weeks left in the school year, they were going in the spring of 2022, they were going to do mandates. I'm like, what? And they had promised mandates earlier, and then Biden got taken to court for the federal mandates, because he was mandating on, I think, on private businesses of over 100 people. And so that court case, so that delayed it. But I was sending the president studies, mostly out of Europe, saying, hey, there's this negative efficacy that's happening. I think one of the crazy things, and so I said, well, I'm not taking it. And I was actually coaching high school football in that first 2021 fall, and they were making the students take, if you wanted to play football, not the students, but the coaches, but a lot of students were, but they were wearing masks in their football helmets, playing outside it's like, that's, so I was like, well, I told the head coach, I said, look, I love coaching, I love football, but I'm taking the shot.
Yeah.
And he said, well, let me talk to the AD. And so they gave me an exemption there. So I'd already had one exemption, then the other with the school. But I think one of the crazy stories is my last couple of weeks as department chair, because then I was so tired of COVID, and John and I had started connecting, started Voices for Medical Freedom. And this became such a more important and passionate part of what I wanted to spend my life doing on a daily basis, that I decided to go, to retire full time and go part time. But in my last month, I had a student contact me toward the end of the school year, and she said, the student said, my teacher is making the COVID vaccine extra credit points. And I was like, what? And and all you had to do is just show a picture of your vaccine card and text it to the teacher. And I'm like, so it's not related to the academic field of study. And it's something that a lot of these students did a year and a half ago. And you're incentivized. And so man, that was, I'm like going, holy moly. And then the teacher had said, but if you aren't vaccinated, then you can do this work and get less credit, but you can do multiple. And I'm like, that the inequity in that was striking. So I said, okay, how am I going to approach this? I'm definitely speaking up and addressing this. This is my last stand as department chair. So I went over to the because there's a religion, so I went over to the students' rights department, or the diversity, and I asked the department chair, or the project manager of that department, and I said, do you have a problem with this? And she says, I'm all for vaccines. I'm pro the COVID vaccine, and so many people were still afraid, but this is wrong. This is wrong just on a civil rights, religious rights basis. I go, okay, I just wanted to get your take on that. And then I went over to the disabilities office, and I talked to the person there, because if you have a medical disability and you can't take the vaccine, you're being, you're being discriminated against on that basis. So now I had my support and my homework done. So I talked, and then I talked to the teacher, and we had a bit of an interesting falling out to a degree, but she went home and thought about it and adjusted a little bit. But I sent to HR and to the president an email. And so one of my concerns that I listed is, you know, have you all talked about the liability
Yeah.
issue
Yeah.
that this, and I told the teacher, gosh, if I can't imagine giving as a professor enforcing a mandate. Can you imagine how would you live with yourself? And I told the teacher this, the professor. I said, if I mandated this for extra credit and incentivized that, and there was a bad outcome, a reaction that was devastating, put somebody in a hospital or put somebody in a wheelchair, how can you live with yourself? I'm not saying it in a negative way. I'm just, as caring for you as a colleague, I couldn't, so maybe want to rethink that. So one of the things I've been pushing for is a revisit. Here's what's interesting. I think we can all do this at different levels, whether you're a student asking the administration to do this, or whether you're an instructor, or whether you're somebody at work. All these institutions and organizations have had committees they've made these decisions kind of in a groupthink space. They didn't, typically was not one person that did it on their own. They got advisors, so what I'm asking our school to do is to revisit like you would anything else. So there's a policy that gets put into place, and then the policy unwinds and things happen. And then you go back, you complete the loop, and you go back and you review and you evaluate, how did that work out? I mean, it's in every organization typically does this as common practice. So I'm asking our college to complete the circle and review the policies that were made, to what we learned, what mistakes we made, and what things we did that were good. And I've also volunteered that, hey, if you want a fresh face on that committee, I'd be willing to do it, and if not, would like to have at least, a half hour to an hour of their time to fill in some gaps that they may not know about.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I'm just thinking to myself, and for me and Camille, that would be a really good idea. Something we could propose to our school, and then again, offer our time to come and provide our insights on that stuff. It's interesting too, because I mean, I'm sure Camille agrees that most of our universities today have a kind of a classical liberal underlying, philosophy to them. And it was just fascinating to sit in classes where you're going over Hobbes and Kant and all these great thinkers, and it's completely in violation. It's so obvious that the current policies are so contradictory to what you assume to be the classical liberal education. But anyways, just to jump into kind of, we have section 3 of our kind of guidance for this outline for questions that mark guidance and integrity, and it's such an important part of your guys' story, which it just comes so evident in your guys' characters there. But have you guys, I mean, playing sports, you guys have faced some pretty sizable challenges. I've often kind of referred to being in this field of medical freedom there, almost like playing an away game, and crowds heckling you, and the odds are against you a little bit. For a great athlete, I mean, like a coach is almost like for what a student has a great professor. You guys had John, pardon me, Jerry Sloan as a coach, and then Ken, you had Mike Holmgren as a coach. What lessons did you guys learn from your coaches? Maybe if academia wasn't the most forefront thing in your university experience, but for your professional careers too, and for your university, what great lessons did you learn from your coach in the lessons from the game, in which allowed you to take such an impact and step forward in this particular aspect of your career, the medical freedom side? I can let John start there if you like.
Man, I'm trying to think of all the lessons I learned from Jerry Sloan and Frank Layden before him. And one was, Frank said right up, don't change. Don't let the lights change you. You're this person coming in. It implies that he liked me at that point. And he said, just don't change. Anyway, so I thought that was a great lesson. I think Jerry Sloan's was just a competitive lesson that you owe certain things to your teammates. You owe your best effort, and that effort isn't just on the court that day. It's in preparation for that day on the court that day. It's the preparation the night before. Am I getting my rest? Am I eating appropriately? So taking care of yourself to be a better part of the team is a big part of that lesson. And so, I think that, basically people on both sides of this fence tried to be the best teammate they could. If they chose to be vaccinated to protect the others, they're trying to be a good teammate. It might be misguided, because I think you got to do the best things you can to make yourself the best and bring that to the team, versus limit yourself by some other standard to be part of that team. And so maybe that's a distinction that I gained there. Maybe it was from growing up in my family. I don't know, but the last thing he just said is you just never give up, and that's failure's part of sports. I lost so many games, I can't put a number to it, but you lose when you quit fighting for it, right? It's because losing isn't fatal. If you say, okay, well, I lost tonight, I'm going back to the drawing board, I'm going to work harder the next time, I'm going to win tomorrow. It's just that never give up stuff that is hugely valuable, and I think it's valuable here. So even though we've had a lot of losses, we're not gaining a lot of ground in the courts, gaining some, just not going to give up.
Yeah.
So that's the lesson.
Well put. And to you there, Ken?
Yeah, I think the two coaches that stand out to me, Mike Holmgren's one, and John Robinson, although, at USC, who is an outstanding coach at the college level as well as the pro level. And I'd have some coaches that were on the edges, edges on kind of a very authoritative type of a coach, and also a head coach that was on kind of a Pollyannish, we'd have, guys were already packing their bags for the off season, and he'd say, now look, guys, it's the Dumb and Dumber, you're saying there's still a chance, mathematically we can still do it. And everybody else is like, oh, we're getting our rears beat. Sometimes you got to do that. It's like, you got to figure out how to get, but I think what Mike brought was a balanced integrity, full integrity. And when I say balance, I think the balance part of that was engaging in human beings. And I'll give you an example. And Mike could, Coach Holmgren, he could fire it up, but he could also, sympathize. And he used both of those with a very human touch. And so I remember it was third down. We had this rookie. He was a tight end. He was our second tight end, and we're in a 2 tight end set. And coach calls a play going to throw it to him as kind of this, like, nobody's going to pay attention to him. And he drops the ball, and and it's a critical fourth quarter play. It was the second quarter. It was right before the half. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I look over to the sidelines, and Coach Holmgren is lit up, and he's ready to just unleash fire on this young kid, right? And I look over at the guy's first name. I won't throw him under the bus too far, Jeff. And he's just beating himself up, just lambasting himself for, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I did that. I'm just terrible. And I look back over at Coach Holmgren, and his face is completely changed into this. And he gets with the guy, and he goes, hey, look. These kind of things happen, look, I'm going to need you later in this game. We're going to need you. So, take a second, get yourself back together. So based on the context of what's going on, I just thought, wow, okay, that, and so I'm still trying to fully learn that lesson of engaging people and where they are in the context where they are, and being, finding that balance between achieving, the goal and the context of our humanity.
Yeah, well put.
Absolutely. And in many ways, I mean, for athletes, just like for students, I mean, a great coach can be like a great professor too, right? Guiding you in the right way, having the switches, whether it be on or off, or sympathy or motivation, being able to get the best out of their students. I think it's extremely important for professors to have that switch, especially in times like this, like knowing when to when to respect their students, when to push them. I mean, at least during the pandemic, I know I looked at certain teachers in a more respectful light, you could say. I mean, those who chose to listen to me and hear me out, as opposed to the one that led to the mask protest. Yeah, I mean, you could definitely relate the two. But I was wondering, so both of you being, you know, well-respected athletes playing for iconic teams, how did that responsibility of being, you know, public American figures imprint a certain level of patriotism on yourselves, and how did that feeling of patriotism impact your decision to take a stand on COVID?
Well,
John, if you want to start,
yeah,
sorry.
I'll start with that. I mean, you never growing up, we enjoyed great things in this country, all the freedoms, and we never thought I'd ever have to fight for them, you know. So it's something the forefathers did. We're the beneficiaries. What a great country! All these things, and it's suddenly we're thrust upon us that up for grabs right now, whether our freedoms are even going to be available for our kids and grandkids. And so I never thought of it in terms of being patriotic. It is. I mean, it's for me with Gonzaga, when you fight Gonzaga for something that I feel they're doing very wrong, it's not because I hate Gonzaga. It's quite the opposite. I love it. And because I love
Yeah.
it, it's worth fighting for, and it's worth taking a few knocks on the chin to do it. This country is a phenomenal country. We have so many warts right now, that I'm frustrated with it. I am angry in a lot of ways. And yet this is worth fighting for. And it's worth trying to kind of nudge back in the direction that our forefathers had started with. The NBA is another one. I mean, it's if there could have been a situation that could have been better for me in my life that was different from I'd like to find out who that was. Great experiences in the NBA and great friends out of it. And I don't want them to crash and burn. I want them to wake up and say, look, this is a bad direction, folks. And protect their athletes, protect their athletes' futures, protect the athletes' children's futures. So when you say, yeah, that you brought up patriotism, absolutely it's patriotism. When you're willing to take a few knocks on the chin to disagree,
Yeah.
in a big way. You guys have protested, right? I know. So you've done it. It's more a sign of patriotism than just taking the shot, you know? And I think
Absolutely.
that the shot's these way. I don't know, maybe there's a connection with going to church. It's just going to church doesn't make you religious, right? Yeah. If I don't know, I'm getting off the subject there, but my point is that it's worth fighting for, and if that makes me a patriot, then so be it. And but I am going to continue.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is interesting, the paradox behind those who love their country the most are the ones willing to stand up and say no and fight for it, and those that arguably complain and, you know, say, oh, this isn't fair, it's not fair. Those are the ones that listen to the, you know, follow every last order and refuse to think about or think about the direction before complying with something. I mean, if not to go too philosophical on you guys, but yeah, I mean, that is, I've never really thought about that. That is pretty interesting. And Ken, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the same things that John said. And so instead of being, you know, redundant, because I mean, he can't say it better anyway, but I will put a little sociological spin on it. You know, one of the things we talk about in sociology is unearned privileges, you know, that, you know, which has become such a memeish banner phrase of your privilege and white privilege. This, how about 21st century American privilege? You talk about an unearned privilege, both unearned and both such a privilege in the whole of humanity, you know. And Sheldon, you were talking about like Mills and Locke and you know, and those great thinkers and philosophers, you know, that brought in this new era that we're the beneficiaries of. And John mentioned the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, which I call the Secessionary War, because we were seceding from, you know, the Declaration of Independence really was this legal declaration of, you know, England, you violated our contract of governance, and we're going to secede. And of course, that happened. But and all the wars of World War One, and all the lives and the sacrifices, and here we are, the beneficiaries of that. I would ask all of us, and I'm going to think myself a little bit more about this, is wow, what a privilege we have to live in this country at this time in history. Are we just going to, it's almost all the people that have sacrificed to bring that privilege to us today. This seems like there's a level of responsibility that we owe those people, in gratitude, as well as the responsibility to carry forward. And so many people have, politicians as well as historians and philosophers, have talked about, and even Ben Franklin, supposedly, I don't know if you're a history major, you may know it better, but when he was asked coming out of the Constitutional Convention, sir, what, by a lady, sir, what have you given us? And he says, a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it.
Yes.
They knew how hard it was to keep that. And when you look at all of human history, total government, tyrannical government, totalitarian government has ruled the day. We're living in a unique moment that is not common to human history, but it's easy to think that. So I would, encourage all of us, and of course, I'm gonna be a thumb pointer, start with myself and go, what am I doing, to recognize this privilege, and then to be responsible for carrying that torch. And by the way, speaking of academics, I do have to get going because I got a class I got in a little bit.
Understood. We just got one last question for you guys, and thank you very much, Ken, for that. And it's a great statement by Franklin at the end there, and so it's worth repeating for sure. Just one last question there. Do you have any advice for students? We often ask this at the end regarding, potential approach to dealing with something like this, the likes of which we're seeing with COVID there. Potential something like this could come back in the future, and a nice way to encourage students there to take a stand and speak up for what's right. Start with John there, if you like.
Yeah, I heard a wise man told me once that he trained bears for a living. He's actually a movie star, trained bears for a living, and he said, don't let school get in the way of your education. Mm-hmm. And even though that college education, that degree is hugely valuable, I would say to students, don't let that be the breadth of your education. Seek knowledge elsewhere. Seek knowledge in your friends. Seek knowledge in books, and be a lover of learning. Read. Put away your video games. Gosh, if I could break those things, I think the world would be healthier. Again, Ken said, pointed at me, and I don't do video games, but I don't really ban them or anything like that. But point the thumbs. If we get rid of those and the cell phones, we'd have a healthier world. So yeah, that's my advice for what it's worth.
Right on. And for you there, Ken?
Well, John, I bet you just about got me convinced to give up my smartphone, because John to this day, John still uses a cell phone. I mean, a flip phone. And I'll tell you what, man, Jonathan Haidt just came out with a NYU professor, a social psychologist at NYU, came out with a book. He did Coddling of the American Mind. Yes, was a co-author in that, but his new book is talking about how this is just destroying our young people's minds. And so, yeah, I mean, I would agree with what John said. I think one of the things I want to do is I want to thank you guys and Mad for your stand and the time and the energy and the commitment you guys have given, and thank all the students that are standing up with you and that are listening and thinking about it. I would say, to those that are on the edge, go ahead, man, step into that stand and take that stand. And Jordan Peterson talks about this. If you have something that you're withholding, that's your truth in the area of taking a stand, or any area, that violation of yourself is just wicked, hurtful to who you are as a person. But then, as far as advice, I would say, and by the way, along with John's lines, I tell my own students, hey, look, don't believe me. Don't trust me. At least don't trust me. Go do it. Figure this out. Think outside the box for yourself, instead of that Prussian pedagogy of the professor is the giver of all gold knowledge, and then you regurgitate it back. We're going to mix it up, man. Now I poke and prod my students, and yeah, it can get a little tense. But I would say one of the things I work with NFL players that are retired and in transition, and I sometimes, with a special student, when we have a conversation, I'll say, look, in 8 years, you're going to graduate, but in 8 years, you're going to be 30 years old. What do you want life to look like in 30 years? I mean, not in 30 years, at 30 years old, in 8 years or 7 years, or if you're 18, in 7 years, you're going to be 25, and you're going to be 25, whether, no matter what you do between now and then, in 7 years, you're going to be 25. So you might as well make a plan of what you want that life to look
Yeah.
like, and then back play that. And one of the things I call dream surfing is I say, wake up. Like those movies, where you like wake up and the kid becomes a 30-year adult, or the guy wakes up from a dream and he's back in his high school days, or, like Big with Tom Hanks, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I said, pretend like you wake up in that movie, but you're a 30-year-old or 25-year-old self. Look over who's next to you in bed. What kind of house are you living in? What kind of what did your alarm clock go off? Get the details, get the specifics, because if it's just this generality, and then write these things down. I don't know, John, John and I haven't really talked too much about, our playing days, although I love his stories. But, it's like I always found that when I wrote my goals down on paper, all of a sudden, that declaration, it really kind of said, hey, you're driving it, you're burning the ships on the shore, you're putting a stake in the ground. So that'd be my advice.
Right on. Really well, eloquently said,
Love it.
Ken. And yeah, that's fantastic, guys. What a treat! And this has been fantastic and really inspiring. I know for all our student listeners and professors who tune in as well. So, thank you so much for taking your time to share it with us today. It's really very much appreciated.
Well, you guys give me hope. I'm probably speaking for Ken too, and we know him well enough. You guys give us hope that there are young people out there that are seeing it and paying attention and thinking for themselves and willing to step up and be leaders. So congratulations to you. Thank you. I know you probably don't feel like heroes, but to somebody you are. And from my point of view, very proud to know you and have been a part of this. So thanks.
Thank you, John. Yeah.
We
Thank you, Ken.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, you give us a lot of hope.
Well,
Give
yeah,
us a
you as
lot
well.
of hope. Thank
You
you.
give us to us as well. So it's all mutual there. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.